r/AskReddit. What is the worst case of I know better than my doctor you've ever heard of? That recent couple who had a malnourished 7-month-old who decided that their kid was gluten intolerant and so never gave him anything besides crap like quinoa milk. They owned a health food store and were health nuts. Also, anyone who came in and saw the sickly child commented, but they brushed it off and didn't seek help. Drove to a homeopathic doctor across the country who sent them to a hospital, but they apparently decided to drive back home first. Baby died before they got to the hospital. Autopsy revealed the child was severely dehydrated and the stomach had been empty for days. Weighed about 9 pounds added, which is just slightly higher than a newborn. They knew so much more than a doctor that they decided not to go to a doctor. Edit. I woke up to this blowing up. Sorry for the long wait. I'll post the news article below, but since a lot of us are rightly sickened by the story, here's the outcome. The judge gave them 6 months suspended sentence after determining that they didn't willfully neglect their child, and you can't charge them for murder just because they are stupid. I beg to differ. The parents say they tried unsuccessfully to feed their child, but it fussed with the bottle and breast milk, and so they concluded their baby must be lactose intolerant and also gluten intolerant. Instead of getting actual doctors involved, they felt confident enough in their self-diagnosis that their baby had an eating disorder to continue giving the baby quinoa milk and the like. They didn't notice anything wrong with their baby after that, except now the child causally having severe trouble breathing. After visiting the homeopathic doctor, they didn't make it fast enough to a real hospital. They live in Belgium, which isn't exactly huge, but I'm trying, unsuccessfully, to leave my opinion out of it. Interesting to note, a prayer card was tucked into his diaper. Prayer in quinoa, folks, that's all you need. If your baby was fine, why do you need a prayer card? I'm so furious. Also, thank you all for the comparison to your own baby weights. I too know a lot of 9 pounds newborns, so I can't imagine how sickly her looked. Witnesses say he looked shrunken and grey. My brother-in-law has chronic back pain and regularly goes to a chiropractor for it, and apparently said chiropractor also works on my Bill's neck. After one chiropractor appointment, my Bill experienced severe weakness to the point where he could hardly get out of bed. At one point, apparently, he collapsed and had slurred speech. I, an RN, was like, dude, get thee to the hospital, because that sounds like a stroke. At the time of this conversation, I was also hanging out with another nurse who used to work in neurology, and she agreed he should see a doctor as soon as possible. He was like, nah, my chiropractor's a doctor, and knew about it, and said it would go away. He's very much an old health kind of guy, and thinks stuff like vitamins and coconut oil will cure anything. I remember looking after this one guy who came in post myocardial infarction from the cath lab. His blood pressure, BP, was sky high. Patient denied any major health issues in the past, and he only took supplements. I called the doctor about his BP and doctor ordered some antihypertensive pills. Before the patient took them, he ranted about Big Pharma and how drugs don't work, and that if he were just allowed to go home to take his usual herbs or whatever, he'd be fine. Judging by the fact that his BP refused to come down after the pills and required an 4th nitroglycerine infusion, his ECG showed signs of left ventricular hypertrophy, typically caused by high BP over time, and the fact that he had a massive heart attack showed me that his heart problems had been brewing for a while, and, as expected, his herbal supplements were doing squat. Probably me. I've talked about this before, but I'll share again as sort of a sap. I was addicted to a drug called Mercindal, which contains a relaxant plus codeine plus paracetamol. It started at 2 tablets a day, then 4, then 8. After a couple of years I was taking 40 plus a day. I thought all the warnings about don't take more than 8 a day were stupid. I was all, I take 40 a day so I'm fine. I went to hospital for an unrelated issue with my eye and they freaked about how much paracetamol was in my system. I lied and said I took heaps due to pain in my eye. They tested my liver and it was inexplicably fine. From there I realized just how close I was coming to death daily. I had built up a major tolerance, but generally 40 plus paracetamol is enough to kill 2 people. It's insanely lethal. It took me another year to give it up and have researched it a lot now. People think Panadol/Tylenol is harmless. It's not. People take heaps, wake up fine, and think they're safe. In reality, overdose symptoms don't appear until you're literally dying, and there's nothing they can do to save you. You have a 24-hour window to have your life saved. Even if you build up a tolerance, it doesn't mean you're safe. I'm the exception to the rule. TL. Doctor was addicted to a drug that contained paracetamol. Thought warnings on the packet were stupid. They are not. Tylenol/Panadol/paracetamol, or whatever name you know it as, it's insanely lethal. Read the packet instructions and do not deviate. You are not a doctor. Edit. I want to add that paracetamol is called acetaminophen in the US. Also should say that I'm 3.5 years clean. Saying clean sounds weird because I've always been so anti-drug. I don't even like weed much. Legal medicine can sort of blindsight you. Caught me so off good. It started as what does it hurt for me to take a couple to get to sleep? But the more I took, the less they worked as my tolerance got harder. I fell in love with them basically. Then taught myself to fall out of love. Stay safe, Reddit. So I know this is a bit backwards, but it'll probably get buried anyways. So here goes. Back in the second semester of my first year of university, I started to notice something was off. I was having bad stomach aches, my hair and skin went super dry, I randomly gained 10 to 15 pounds, which at 5'2" was quite noticeable, and I was exhausted all the time. Literally I could get 10 plus hours of sleep and wake up out of my mind tired. Finally, when it got to the point that my friend in calculus had to wake me up from nodding off literally 6 times over the course of one 50-minute lecture, I decided I'd had enough. I got him to help drag me over to our campus clinic and got on the list to see a doctor. A couple hours later I'm in an office and explain everything to the nurse and then again to the doctor. He asks me a few basic questions about my lifestyle, when my last period was, etc. and says we'll do a blood test and see you in a couple days. Blood test happens. He tells me it comes back normal, but he wanted to do it again. So back I go to the clinic to get poked. Yet again, the results come back normal, lather, rinse, and repeat for a third time. Now, through all of this, I'm still experiencing all the same symptoms, and am in no way, shape, or form the functioning human being I previously was. It had been a month and a half, and I was tired of being poked and being told everything was fine. What does this guy want to do? Of course. Run a 4th blood test? I lost it. I asked him, do you think it will show anything different? He goes, if it's what I think it is, it might. I reply, I'm done with mites. I'd like to know what the next step is in regard to diagnostic options. His solution? An abdominal ultrasound. Okay, at least it's moving somewhere away from what has gotten us nowhere so far, but I was curious. What was he looking for / did he expect it to show? Turns out, the dickhead had decided that as a first year, newly legal, and single female living on her own, the only solution was that I had gone crazy with my promiscuous ways and must be pregnant. Despite the fact that I was on birth control and had had 3 blood tests done with negative results, he was convinced that I was just early enough that the hormone level hadn't built up enough to be detected in my blood. Luckily, I live in the land of the Great White North. Yay, universal healthcare, but still. I ended up getting the ultrasound anyways, partly to prove him wrong and partly just in case anything else showed up that this idiot would otherwise not tested for, and sure enough, guess who wasn't pregnant? Everything else looked normal too, so I gave up and didn't go back. A week or two later I had a 4-day weekend and flew back to my home province. My mom took one look at me and drove me straight to my childhood family doctor's office. By the time I was ready to fly back for school 4 days later, I had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that had become severe due to being allowed to go unchecked, had a treatment plan in place, and finally felt for the first time in months like I wasn't crazy. How did they diagnose this, you ask? A simple blood test. Turns out it's amazing the amount of information you get back when you aren't only checking the box for pregnancy tests to be run. I spent 10 years dealing with extreme pelvic pain and heavy bleeding. It started out as bad periods and ended up getting to the point where I was bedridden with pain from the waist down and couldn't do anything myself. My boyfriend had to help me take showers and get dressed. I'd soak through a Super Plus tampon and overnight pad in an hour or less. I kept having ovarian cyst ruptures. I had chronic back pain. I couldn't have sex because it felt like being stabbed. I kept gaining more and more symptoms and became suicidal. I was taking oxycodone, hydrocodone, and 800 milligrams of ibuprofen every 6 hours and was still in pain. I went to over a dozen doctors and they all told me I just had bad periods or needed to lose weight, and some straight up told me I was exaggerating the pain to get attention or drugs. It was routine for me to go to the for fourth painkillers during bad episodes because the pain would leave me screaming in bed. I started doing research and joining online support groups and narrowed it down between a few diseases and would bring them up at my appointments to see if there was a way to screen for them. My doctors would ignore it and test me for diabetes and thyroid issues instead, even though I didn't have problems with either. I finally found a doctor who diagnosed me with PCOS and endometriosis and performed a surgery to remove the endometrial adhesions and a very large ovarian cyst. He also suggested I try Nexplanon. It's now been a year and 3 months since my surgery and a year and 2 months since getting the Nexplanon, and my symptoms are drastically reduced. I don't get periods. I haven't had a cyst rupture since my surgery. I'm able to live a normal life and might become an assistant manager at my job. I rarely have pain days, and if I do it's nothing compared to what I used to have every day. I suffered with progressively horrible symptoms for a decade and was treated like shit by so many doctors, only for one doctor to drastically improve my quality of life in the span of 3 appointments. Sometimes people are wrong and should listen to their doctor, but sometimes doctors are wrong and should listen to their patients. All of the bullshit I went through could have been avoided if I had met a compassionate doctor sooner. I once worked with a patient who had total placenta previa, where the placenta sits on top of the cervix. What that means is, because when the woman goes into labor the cervix has to open up, and the placenta has to get torn open for that to happen. There is a lot of bleeding. A crazy large amount. It's really fairly manageable these days though. You have to make sure they are close to medical assistance, so if they do go into labor they can get help and book them for an early C-section to try to avoid them going into labor. This lady however wanted none of it. She insisted staying in the deepest darkest countryside, 3 hours from the nearest hospital, and she insisted on a natural birth and just said she would come into hospital when labor started. I can understand not wanting to move, but it wouldn't have been all that for her. She just would have had to stay with her parents for a bit to avoid, dying. This was explained to her repeatedly, trying to get her to change her mind, but she wouldn't budge. Then she went into labor at 37 weeks. By some maths of stroke of good fortune she went into labor at the supermarket in town, just after going to an obstetrics appointment, so she happened to be only 10 minutes away. She still bled so heavily that she arrested on arrival at the hospital. She got an emergency C-section while she was dead, then a hysterectomy along with God knows how many liters of fluids and blood, and by the skin of her teeth managed to survive. You know what her line was on leaving the hospital? Well, my way turned out alright in the end, didn't it? Here's a kind of backward situation. Top edit. The family doctors in this story are nurses, so not actual doctors. They did go to medical school though. My bad for the confusion. Edit. Seriously dudes. I made a mistake. Calm down. All I know is that they're nurses and they all did 6+ years in medical school. Not sure which ones, cause I never cared to ask. I get that I shouldn't use nurse and doctor interchangeably. That's all on me. But holy shit, you're laughisty. About 6 years ago I scratched my face really badly and it got infected. I was put on a sulfur medication for 14 days and that was that. Day 1. Felt weird. Mother asked the doctors in my family and they all said it was normal. Day 2. Extremely uncomfortable, same response. Day 3. Ended up going on a flight. When I got off I was throwing up tons. Doctors said it was because of the flight. Day 4. No longer wanted to eat anything. My stomach hurt too bad. Period started without warning. Day 5. Constant pain. Period heavier than ever. Doctors told me it was just a heavy flow of my period. Day 6. I'm begging my mother to let me stop taking the medication and to let me go to the actual doctor. She calls the doctor in the family again, and they conclude I'm just being dramatic. Day 7. Refusing to get up. Have gone through a box of tampons in 4 days. Downing Advil and the other over-the-counter painkillers like it's candy, as well as chugging NyQuil to help me fall asleep. Day 8. Slept the entire day away in a drug-induced slumber. Was told I'm just being lazy. Day 9. Doctors told my mom to take away the Advil and NyQuil. She did. Spent the rest of the day just sitting naked in the bathtub because I was bleeding through pants and tampons like crazy. Mom and doctor still think I'm exaggerating. I never let my mom into the bathroom. Was just trying to brush it off as bathroom issues. Day 10. I throw up blood. A lot of blood. Mother finally agrees to take me to the hospital. I'm immediately rushed in and given a blood transfusion and have my stomach pumped to remove any traces of the sulfur drug. I had a severe allergic reaction to the sulfur which caused my blood to stop clotting, hence the period. A normal platelet number is 150k to 450k. Mine was down to 10k. I was on the verge of bleeding out and any injury cold caused serious damage. Now my mom doesn't understand why I never listen to the doctors in the family. I don't care if they know what they are doing. Obviously they can't understand over the phone, also listen to your kids, damn it. If they say something is seriously wrong, don't immediately assume they're faking to get out of something. Edit. Just gonna mention that my mom wasn't trying to neglect me or anything. I would cry wolf about being sick a lot back then because of my depression. I was also supposed to go to a family event, hence why I was on the plane, and was notorious for getting sick when I had to do stuff like that. The doctor in the family was also my grandma, so my mom trusts her a lot. Aunt also chimed in, but it was mostly my grandma. Also it was 6 years, almost 7, ago, not 4. Recently found a pic of me in the hospital bed with the date. I was 14/15 when it happened. Super edit. My mom is not a bad parent. She's made mistakes, sure, but the amount of people calling her neglectful and a horrible person is honestly sickening to me. This woman has stayed up night after night looking after me when I was suicidal and does everything in her power for me. I love her so incredibly much, and even if she made a mistake in the past, I don't blame her. Like I said, I was constantly crying wolf about illnesses for years. Even now she still goes way out of her way to care for my useless ass, and if it wasn't for her help, I would've committed suicide years ago. It's hard to understand the situation if you were not there, and trying to make you guys understand would take hours. Since you are clearly hellbent on labeling my mother as a demon, call me anything you want, but don't judge my mother over a mistake. Hey, are you surprised? It's another edit. Okay Reddit doctors, stop trying to diagnose me. I had doctors that could see me do that. It was an allergic reaction to the drug, which caused thrombocytopenia, low platelets, but in low doses it only causes hives and itchiness as well as my throat closing up. It was the large dosage that caused such a dangerous autoimmune response. I doubt we still have the hospital papers, but I can always take a look when I have a minute. Not exactly an I know better moment, but it kind of applies. So my father is an orthopedic surgeon in Texas, and he deals with a lot of backwards, absurdly obese people pretty much daily, and one day, this extremely large, ballparking around 300 to 350 pounds, woman came in or with a completely shattered foot. I mean, that sucker was turned into powder. Apparently she flipped an off-road side by side and got her foot crushed under it. My dad absolutely hates operating on ankles and feet. He likes hips and knees, so he was dreading this surgery. It took about 30 to 45 minutes to do whatever doctors do, perform miracles, and he believes he's done with it for now. The patient gets released sometime later and then immediately decides to get back on the side by side. I bet you can guess what happens next. She rolls it again and crushes the same ankle, which fucks up the screws and rods in her leg, keeping everything in place. She shows back up and gets operated on and gets her now meat ground ankle all patched up again. So a few days later, my father receives a legal notice with a ton of paperwork citing what he's being sued for. So he defends himself in court and gets sent to the Texas Medical Board, knowing full well that he's done nothing wrong and Einstein is the one who fucked up. But the case gets closed and he was found negligible by 2% or 5% or something. I don't know the rules. Him not in the medical field because she was booked back into the hospital within a certain amount of time of the surgery. So he got a strike on his license and now has to go to the medical board every 6 months to prove he is capable of being a doctor, all because of one idiot. TL. Doctor, some fat lady broke her ankle four-wheeling, got it fixed, then broke it again on the same four-wheeler, sued my dad and got him in trouble for no reason of his own. The lawyer can look at the judge, look at the plaintiff, then look back at the judge and say back quote, "Are you shitting me, Chris Porter?" I'm a nurse. I won't go too far into detail because of laws and stuff, but I did have a case where I had a patient who had sleep apnea. For those that don't know, sleep apnea causes a potentially deadly heart arrhythmia called atrial fibrillation, where one part of the heart flutters 4 or 6 times faster than the rest of the heart. During this, a blood clot can form, break off, and said blood clot can travel to places where it shouldn't be, resulting in stroke, heart attack, or pulmonary embolism. One of the treatments of sleep apnea is to lose weight, another is to use a CPAP machine to assist in breathing at night. And for those not in the know on sleep apnea, it's where you stop breathing in your sleep for sometimes several minutes, your oxygen drops, and you can cause heart and brain damage. Anyway, patient loses like 100 plus pounds at the urging of his doctor after he has started on a CPAP to help with the sleep apnea. Suddenly he's not feeling well, ends up in the ER with a full-blown Wadowmaka heart attack. I'm talking to him and finding out about his health history and hear about his weight loss. He said, "I lost so much weight I even stopped using my CPAP." I then asked if his doctor told him this. His reply, "Nope, I just figured I didn't need it anymore because I'm at a normal weight." He still had sleep apnea, still had atrial fibrillation, and then almost died because he never bothered to ask his doctor for a follow-up sleep study to see if he needed the treatment anymore or not. Lesson here: always follow up, especially if suddenly you think you're healthy. I'd have to go with vaccines cause autism, but I really want to tell another story that goes in a bit of a different direction. I have Asperger's and had a difficult childhood because of it. It was clear that something was different in first grade when I solved math assignments way faster than everyone else, but also had no friends and no one really liked me, and I did some weird stuff during school time when I had finished my assignments. So my mother went to several experts with me and all of them immediately said it was ADHD and wanted to give me some prescription for it. My mother started doubting them because they seemed to jump to the conclusion pretty quickly. So she read a lot about ADHD, and this part is really fucking important, because if you doubt experts you better have a solid base of knowledge to do so. And it turned out, while some of the symptoms were things I did, but overall it didn't really fit at all. So we went to several other experts until one finally suggested Asperger's. Then my mother started reading a lot about Asperger's, and it seemed to fit. And there was a book that said one of the most common misdiagnoses people with Asperger's get is ADHD. So she had me tested, and it turned out she was right. From there, we could start develop strategies together and tell my teachers about it in order to deal with it. And now I'm close to getting a bachelor's degree in mathematics, which I wouldn't even have gotten the chance to if we'd have gone with the ADHD pills. I hope you all understand what I'm trying to say, because English isn't my native language, and I suck at things like that. I guess the moral is that, while experts are right most of the times, it isn't always wrong to doubt them. However, only do so if you have a good reason and some kind of proof or a base of knowledge. I know what's best for my child, for example, is not what I mean. Look for articles and books from credible sources and authors. And I love my mom. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.